Good day and welcome to the Strong Ambition Podcast. I'm your host, Rhyland. I'm here to dive into what makes people ambitious or help them live a more ambitious life, especially in the realm of nutrition, exercise, or mindset, because that's what I do and that's how I help people. I can help you anytime you want to reach out, try to achieve your goals. But today I'm going to give you more of my story. And I'm pretty sure my story can actually help you coming into the holidays here, as this is a very challenging time of year. It's a fun time of year, but it's a challenging time. And I wanted to just express my story, my evolution that I've had over the years. And it's going to give you some really good key points that you can take home. And if you want to know more of this, I also have a how to enjoy the holidays healthy guide. And you can just simply reach out to me. The details are in the show notes. Check out my Instagram and you can just DM me on there and I can send you the whole guide. It's about 30 minutes to an hour, and it's going to walk you through what I showed my clients and how I plan with my clients. So it's much more in depth. This is more of my story, but how I take these in my evolution. I think that's kind of the important part of it. So let's dive right into this. I'm going to give you a little bit of a background for how my experience has kind of altered over the years, because I think that's the really unique thing about it, that I've learned these lessons through trials and tribulations. So previously, years ago, I'm going to say, early 20s, I was, this is back when I was boxing. So I remember talking to a fellow boxer about training and how it actually overlapped well with the mindset for exams. And he had said, before a fight, he wouldn't drink, he'd be very restricted and, stay set. And then he does that for exams too. I'm like, I love this idea. So initially, I'd actually just had this no drinking, just really clean eating, obviously getting ready for a fight. That only makes sense. But then I started to transfer that over to my exams. And then that became a ritual, even when I wasn't a part of boxing. It was actually just something that I always did. I always enjoyed the idea of, okay, I got 30 days out to an event, and this event happened to be an exam. And so if I were to actually be, very disciplined, and I don't want to say restrictive, I want to say disciplined leading up to that event, with my nutrition, my training, and my schoolwork, I'm going to perform better. And that's exactly how it actually happened. It was actually quite beneficial. I remember doing this for the holidays where I said I wasn't going to worry about diet. It wasn't holidays, actually. I'll say this was Halloween. And I said I wasn't going to worry about diet. I was just going to simply, have some candy if it felt like candy. I just didn't want to stress it. But what that led to, and I call it like having a leak in the hull of a boat. So if you have a big wooden boat and there's a little leak in there, well, that's like not caring about your nutrition. When you're going to go through very rough times, that leak is going to get bigger and bigger, and it's going to sink your ship, because you start naturally going into something like candy bars when you're in a stressed state. Well, they give you this dopamine rush. They give you this immediate, it feels good benefit, but they don't actually solve your problem. And then about a half hour to 2 hours later, you're thinking of another one and you're feeling grosser and grosser. Personally, that's how I felt. And I was like, wow, this was a terrible idea. So I always try to keep very clean eating leading up to an exam, and holidays is a perfect time. I did it most exams, but for sure holidays, it made Christmas just extra special to me, because I would still remember, I have this vivid memory of, I had a lot of classes going on, and I was in the grocery store and I was very close to finishing. It was close to the end of the exams, and hearing the Christmas music was like so invigorating, because it just meant I'm so close to being done. And I think I was looking at, all the baked goods, because that's, as soon as the exam's done, I'm allowed to eat whatever, right? So there was a good benefit of how disciplined I was, because, I wouldn't get distracted by food. I'd have my regimented training, and it kept me very clear, because those are the good foods for mental clarity, right? But then when it came time for, okay, well, let's treat ourselves, it was a binge. It was, it was coming out of rehab and I had my first sip of alcohol, and you just go on a bender. And so I had this kind of humoristic look at it. Like, I mean, when you look at what happens there, I was probably improving my body composition. I always got leaner going into the holidays. And I said I was training for the holidays. Then after the holidays, I would gain a fair bit of weight right back, maybe even a bit more. And, for me, it was, I like was okay with it, which isn't good. And I would even kind of say, and I justified this, right? I made it so it sounded better than it was. So I described it as being on and off the wagon. And so when you're on the wagon, you go to jump off the wagon. And I made it real poetic. So when you jump off the wagon, there's this moment in time where you're jumping and you're in the air and you feel weightless, like you can fly. And that is probably pretty close to how people feel. Pretty close. I don't know exactly what it's like to be an alcoholic or have any other, substance abuse issues, but I know the feeling of going into a binge. And there is this doors are wide open feeling. I actually felt it quite recently where, okay, I'm binging. Like I just accept it. And there's this complete, like just alleviation of I'm not holding back feeling. And, that was just for one night. I would have this for multiple days. And so I described it as like, it feels weightless and awesome until you hit the ground hard. And I justified it, right? I thought it was okay because I would end up in a net balance because I would lean up and then I would gain weight, but it's not a bad because it's all a balance, right? So that seems okay, but not really, because I'm kind of wasting my effort and there's just better ways to do it, right? And the other important thing I think for everyone who's listening to recognize is that most people actually gain a lot of weight over the holidays and just don't lose it. So this is from a statistic I got from Lane Norton, and he had said that, and this I'm pretty sure is more of a American study. So because they have Thanksgiving and they have Christmas, New Year's very close together. And so most people can gain like 5 to 10 pounds, but they just never lose it. And so they sustain their weight a lot. Most people sustain it mostly throughout the year, but that's where they gain most of their weight and they just never lose it. So that's a very important stat to know, that we're going into the probability of you gaining most of your weight. And it's so insidious, right? Because it can start off with simply just, a little bit of cookies at work, and then a little bit here and a little bit there. Before you know it, your calories are adding up, because it's not just the holidays, it's the holiday season, right? So this could be happening constantly. Now, I'm personally still a person who tries to navigate those kind of waters. Luckily, I work from home, but even if I was in a workplace environment, I don't treat myself outside of my treating time, and that kind of helps me for that. But the one thing I want to say is that going into the holidays, not have tasting any sugar and then saying you can eat it all, drink it all, and do it all, is very detrimental, and it's realistically a yo-yo diet, right? So what I really learned over the years was not accepting the yo-yo. It's probably one of the biggest things. And I always call it a pendulum. Like you push one way, and then, excessive restriction can yield excessive overcompensation the other way. So to not have excessive restriction leading into the holidays, this is a very big thing for me, because over the years, I always loved it. It was like thrilling. But then I realized how detrimental it was, because I didn't even enjoy the food as much, because I was eating it until I got sick. And so last Christmas was probably one of the first Christmases I didn't intentionally excessively cut and then just binge. I just kind of ate normal. I know I overindulged, fully admit it. I was honestly in a bulk, as I think I had mentioned before, which I shouldn't have been. So I was more careless with my calories. But I think this is a very important lesson, is just to always be careful with your calories. You don't always have to watch absolutely everything, but just to be careful. I've been able to get through all these different holiday occasions in different ways. So sometimes through the holidays, let's say it's like Easter or Thanksgiving, the ones that are just the one big dinner, right? Over the years, how many times you leave those dinners and you're just awkwardly full, right? So one way was excessive restriction in that. It was like, okay, I'm just going to have salad and a bunch of turkey. That's all I'm eating. I'm only eating the protein, the veg, which is fine. You just eat that and you go home and you feel good. Like that's actually great. Like your body will feel fine because it was just a big salad. I did not feel like I was getting the whole experience of that family gathering, right? So over the years, from there, the other end, the in between, really, rather than being excessively indulgent and excessively restrictive, I always take this notion now is, well, my goal should be to experience all the food, right? I should want to try, my sister's mashed potatoes. I should want to try this. I should want to try that. If you want to try it, I'll say personally, like when someone like passes around bread, I'm not one for bread. If you like bread, then you should want to try it. But think of just that word try rather than I got to eat it because I get to eat it today. Like it's not the same. And we get in this mindset a lot that we think these foods are so temporary, right? We can be in this mindset of, well, it's the holidays, when are you going to have holiday food around? When are you going to have eggnog again? When are you going to have this? When you have a, well, realistically, anytime you want, you could find a way to make holiday cookies at any point. You can certainly probably order eggnog any time of the year. We are in an abundance society. That's not the question. It's super ironic that we live in this day and age, because we live in a day and age that it's about really like controlling the excessive abundance that we have. And so the word restriction sounds so scary, but I prefer to just use it as, guide yourself more so. Because you could say that a ditch on a road is technically restrictive, but it keeps you on a path, right? So I evolved a lot throughout all these different holiday events, having this mindset of trying to make sure that, okay, I want to try my sister's dish here and my brother's dish there, but still taking the notion of some, solid proteins. I do windowed eating, right? Because it's just what I've enjoyed ever since I did carnivore. I found it's so nice not to think about food all morning. I have 2 to 3 meals a day. So this already sets me up for the holidays themselves as well, because it's going to be a pretty dense meal at night. So I window it a little bit, but here's the other thing. You don't fast for that whole day and then just try to overcompensate at night, because you will overcompensate. Notice that I was talking about trying food, experiencing food. That's so important, right? Because it's supposed to be flavorful, right? I always try to give food a purpose, right? Each food is going to have a different purpose for what it can do for you. Okay. And that's why I don't think food is bad or good. It's how good is it, right? There's no hot or cold. There's just how much heat is in something. Cold is not an entity. Bad food is not really technically a thing for the most part. The way that I want you to look at it is, what is the food doing for it? Does it have protein to rebuild you? Does it have some sort of an energy source in it, protein or fats or carbs? Does it have micronutrients? And the more micronutrients, and one of the other ones, if it has a lot of micronutrients and some macronutrients, would be protein, fats, or carbs, then it's a pretty solid, high quality food. That would be a healthier food. The less healthy, I'm not saying unhealthy. I think unhealthy is a very poor term, because it is an unhealthy consumption quantity. You can have too much pop, but you could drink a pop and it's not unhealthy until it becomes an unhealthy consumption quantity, right? I can be completely fine after one pop, but if I've had 10, well, my blood sugar is going up a lot, right? So that leads to the last piece, which is enjoyment. And it is integral that your food has enjoyment. Now, when we are at the holidays, when you're around this type of food, we're talking about the food that has energy and enjoyment, plain and simple. But here's the very big truth of this food. We don't need this food for energy. That's not even its job. You're going to get energy. We're in an energy abundance. It's not even the thing that you're going after. If anything, we're trying to contain the amount of energy and maintain the most enjoyment. You see how it's like a bit of a catch-22. We're trying to find a right in between. What's the most enjoyment for the right amount of energy that we're going to consume? Energy being calories, carbs, or fats, right? So when you go to look at a food, and let's just imagine you're at dinner and you're thinking about trying something, try it, because the whole idea of that food is it's not the best idea for giving you protein and carbs and fats. We know this. It's not that good at it unless we're talking about salads and leaner proteins, which I encourage. I'm talking about the foods that we know aren't good at the other things. They're mainly good at energy and enjoyment. They're mainly good at enjoyment, right? So if we're looking at, say, some sort of I'll use a prime example of just like a chicken wing, common little appetizer, right? So a chicken wing that has been breaded, this is no longer just a protein source, right? If it was a chicken wing that was just peppered or something like that, I would actually consider that a well-balanced protein source with energy and fats. Like, I'm actually a pretty big fan of that. But once we bread it, you put some sauce on it. Okay, this is officially mainly about enjoyment. So you have a wing. You say, how was that wing? And you just really experience what that wing is offering you. And then after that, you got to really ask yourself, do I need more of that enjoyment? Or is there other things that is worth your enjoyment in here? And realistically, every single time you're having enjoyment, it's coming with energy. And so if your goal is to not have excessive energy, which it should be, we want to have the right amount of energy, then you're going to want to have the right amount of food, right? You're going to want to have the right amount of enjoyment. And this is what I actually think is just not addressed enough or really discussed appropriately. It's having the right amount of things, right? We can have too much training, not enough training. We can have too much water, not enough water. We can have literally too much air. You can hyperventilate, or not enough air. You can actually not be breathing properly. We can have too much or not enough of anything. And enjoyment is a part of this. Enjoyment is literally something that people have been talking about dopamine depletion. So you actually get away from YouTube, you get away from TV, you get away from these things that synthetically charge it, so that your nervous system is not so dependent on them and have a high expectation for it, because this actually can lead to more depression in a lot of people. So think about this when you're going into the holidays. This is what I always am thinking about every time I have a food or a treat meal for enjoyment, because that's its job. I want it to be just the right amount of enjoyment. And if it's the right amount of enjoyment, where even if it's like a decent amount of calories, if it fits my calorie balance, then it's a net positive, technically. If I just think about what I'm saying here, most days I'm going to try to be in a deficit or maintenance with whole foods, right? One day I'm trying to have, whether it's holidays or just even at home, and I want to have more enjoyment in my food, and I end up having a maintenance. To me, it's actually a net positive, because I got to have something I normally don't get in my food. I get this heightened experience of food. I get to really enjoy it. I get to have that treat, that experience that I normally don't, because whole foods should be limited to how much enjoyment they have. And I'm going to talk about that right after. But let's say I have that, I get that experience, and I'm net positive on my calories, balanced on my calories. To me, it's a net positive of the experience, because of the fact that I'm not gaining weight from that experience. And if that was my intention, especially, I would say more specifically using your intention. If you're even trying to be in a deficit, you could just have fewer calories in that, a couple of fewer bites. That's even double positive to me. But just to come back to the whole idea of what you're really intending on, and why I want to come back to the whole foods. That's what I was going to come back to, is that whole foods themselves should be high satiety, meaning quite filling. They should have a lot of benefit, most benefit that they can offer, whether it's protein and fat, or just protein and micronutrients, right? It could be carbs and micronutrients. It could be fats and proteins. Like, my whole point is, it's protein, it's fats or carbs, and it's micronutrients as much as possible. Micronutrients being vitamins and minerals, right? Now, with that, we want that to have the micro and macronutrients at the right amount, and we want it to be high satiety. We want our body to recognize it. We want it to be easily digested. We want to get energy from these things. Now, what makes a whole food really important, then, it's the palatability that's adequate. It sounds so not fun, but let's just think about this. If your goal is to control your calories, right? Do you think it makes sense for them to be hyper palatable, to be extremely, extremely, extremely tasty? Or maybe just the right amount of tasty? As I was saying, we need the right amount of things, not the maximum. You are not trying to maximize that experience. So I love this example, because this is something that goes way back to, actually, it's just, if you go way back in time, basically, let's go 5,000 years ago, okay? There's not even bread around, right? I'm talking like they were just foraging for food, right? And then someone offers you, right? Like, and I want you to really think about this, the experience of food. Like, you might be eating meat or something like that, cooked meat, right? We're not going that far back. Locally foraged things. Maybe at this point there's bread, but not much, right? Mainly eating, meat and whatever that you can forage. And then someone offers you, and you're not from that area, someone offers you like a pineapple or even an apple. Like, you find an apple for the first time, you're like, oh my goodness, what is this magical creation from the gods? But let's look at right now. If you were to actually consider where would you put a normal distribution of how you feel about food, pleasure, and palatability on a scale from 1 to 10? Like how much you enjoy food. Would you put an apple that high? A lot of people would be like 6, some even a 5. Some people don't like apples. Some people love pineapples, some people don't. There's some subjectivity here, but you put it a little bit higher. If you ate a pineapple for the first time 5,000 years ago, that is guaranteed to be a 10 out of 10. That is guaranteed, because you're only going through your actual normal biological sense of what food could taste like from nature, right? And now, if someone offers you a pineapple or a cookie, well, I'm personally going to take the cookie, right? As far as palatability goes, like I personally love fruit and especially apples. But my whole point is that we're skewed. Like you're skewing your whole experience of what you expect. And I think this is a common mistake from a lot of people, especially around the holidays. It skews it more, right? And that's why it's even super dangerous to go into the holidays always having snacks at different events, like always having snacks. You want to limit it because you don't want to end up dependent and skewing your normal distribution for where you expect your food pleasure to be. So I'm just going to quickly explain what I mean by normal distribution, because it's a little bit of a statistics concept, okay? Some people understand this, some don't. And I do think it's important to understand this. So a normal distribution would have like 80% of things, anywhere from, if it's a scale of 1 to 10, 80% of it is, and I think it's roughly 80, is somewhere around 4 to a 6, most things, okay? Now, from there, you go leaner and leaner out. You might, if you look this up on YouTube, you see normal distribution. And in classes, we skew the distribution because they curve the class so that most people are not failing. So that's why when you see the class average is usually around 60 to 70%, it should be around 65% for the most part. And normal distribution there, it's not 50, right? They don't expect half their clients, or sorry, their students to fail. They want most people passing. So that's why it would be closer to 65% is like half of the people. That's their goal. We kind of end up doing that with our food, is we skew and we push, we curve our expectation for food. And so if I tell someone who normally eats a decent amount of processed food that most of my food pleasure is around a 5 to a 6, in comparison to something like a cookie, they're going to think, that diet sounds terrible. And a lot of people would. I just think that's what happens, right? Because you're used to it, right? And they think, well, I don't want to get used to that, right? So this would make people very, hesitant to think that is the way you should experience food. Remember what I said that you want from food. You want your micronutrients, macronutrients, and you want to have the right amount, and you want to have the right amount of enjoyment, the right amount of everything. And you want to have energy. You want to have digestibility. You're going to skew all of that stuff. You're going to have too much enjoyment. So you don't have enough satiation. And that's probably one of the biggest, most important things if you're trying to control your diet is satiation. And you're probably not going to have good digestibility. If it's hyper palatable food, it's not going to digest well because it's processed, and you're going to consume too much, so that could bog you up even more. So, it was really interesting because I had this conversation with a client just over a year ago where she said, I can't believe you have such an obsession with peanut butter. And I just laughed. I was like, you know what? When you get used to eating whole foods and a lot of protein, you will understand why peanut butter tastes so damn good. And that's really what it is that peanut butter is this in between of a whole food and not quite a whole food. It's kind of what I grade a food is around a C, because it's not in its natural state. And it's also a little bit more palatable than most things. So to me, being in a more controlled calorie environment, my body tastes fat, especially in that form. It's carbs and fat. And that always is the hyperpalatable equation. And my body just thinks, wow, I think I want another. I think I want another. I think I want another. And then, last night, actually, I'm not even kidding. I'm pretty sure one scoop ended up into being 6 or 7 of the nut butter. So that was a bit of a side tangent, but I think I wanted to explain why it's so important to depict the difference between whole foods, hyperpalatable foods, and what you're trying to do in the holidays and what it's going to do. And I'm even going to talk about my evolution for this concept, and especially like planning it going into it. And in that whole foods versus hyperpalatable foods, we're going to talk about after the holidays as well. So the planning of calories leading up to it was an interesting shift I learned this year, again from Lane Norton, really great researcher and kind of a influencer online. He had talked about when you go into the holidays, and again, this is the same thing I would do. I'd train for the holidays and train for social events to look good with my shirt off. That's how I got there. I trained for a photo shoot. That's how I would put in the work. I would stay disciplined. And he talked about when you're going into a holiday, it's probably not a great idea to go in under a deficit. You might want to come out of it, about a week or pretty close to it, because your metabolic rate is going to slow down. Now, I just want to give you a reminder of the metabolic rate and why it slows down. Because if you hadn't heard my last podcast, or it wasn't my last one, it was about 4 or 5 ago, I highly recommend you check out the metabolic one because it explains it, but I'm going to do it roughly here. When you have a calorie deficit, you're giving your body less energy to burn calories, to exist, right? So in a calorie deficit, and after a long period of time, your body will start to adapt to it. This can happen via losing lean muscle mass, and it can also happen through non-exercise activity thermogenesis, which is NEAT, which is just your activity throughout the day. And this is actually to a subconscious level where you might not fidget as much, you might not want to get out of your chair as much. Some people literally fidget and just want to walk around more when they have better energy. So your energy comes down. Now, this starts subtle and then it can be big. So if you've been in a deficit for a long time, for many weeks, you could have actually reduced it, maybe even 5 to 10%, which is, when you actually multiply that by how many calories you have, it's quite a few calories. So your metabolic rate is now lower. You're going to go into the holidays, whether it's Christmas or you're going on vacation, and you are surrounded by a high energy, high palatability zone. What a dangerous place to be. So this is a big shift I learned, was take about a day or two before and plan to come out of it, recoup that metabolic rate. I think that just makes so much sense. And I did it before I went to my trip in Phoenix in the fall. And I generally felt way more in control of my calories. And I think in general, that whole practice before I went on my trip was just reminding me of how good it feels to be on a calorie maintenance, and highly underrated practice. Last year, it dawned on me for the first time, why don't I practice this? And now it's even more and more and more reinforced. Maintenances need to be practiced. So putting it in, maintenance calories, and then you're going to feel a little bit less hungry that day, which is actually a good thing. If you've done, a couple of weeks of a deficit going into it, maybe it's been even longer, you're going to want to be in control in that, because then you can have the right amount of enjoyment, as I just mentioned, right? So this is both a psychological and a physiological thing that you're probably going to want to adapt to, or try to consider the adaptation process for. All right. One of the other tips I would have here is I learned to be very careful around certain foods. And this is a bit of a funny podcast to have, because I'm recording it right now, and I release it this week coming up. So you're going to hear this on the Wednesday that's ahead of me. But tomorrow I'm actually going to be baking cookies. Okay. The reason why I'm actually talking about this is because cookies are my favorite thing in the world. As far as hyper palatable foods that can lead me into a binge, cookies and M&Ms, and I legitimately have M&Ms in my kitchen, and I plan on making M&M cookies. So I'm walking into the den, I'm just really going right after it. And the reason why I actually want to point that out is just to be aware of it. And what I'm trying to do with this whole process is to control my relationship with that food. So I want you to think about this for yourself. So you go into an environment, your holiday dinner, maybe it's a work environment, whatever occasion is going to have a certain kind of food or two, where you're like, "Oh, but I really love those things. I really love pierogies, or I really love this or that, and I just can't get enough of it." Well, that statement right there, "I can't get enough of it," is your answer that that's the food that we're going to talk about. And I'm just going to keep coming back to try to master the relationship with it. It's a relationship with that food and who you are. Okay. And so I say who you are because Alicia Casanata, that was on my podcast a few weeks ago or a few months ago, she really addressed how it's a lot to do with your relationship with yourself and the food, your emotions and the food. So they together create the storm. So let's say you're at a dinner and maybe your uncle or your cousin or your sibling or your mom or your dad are trying to stress you out. Careful about that food. You get one comment from a family member, and then you see those cookies or you see those pierogies, and you're like, I know this is going to make me feel better. So that's a very important knee-jerk reaction that you have to accept that could be there, right? That's a very important thing. So in that moment, in that stressful moment, and we're going to talk specifically about this kind of knee-jerk reaction, because I don't know if anything can emotionally aggravate you better, more deep. It's just a different kind of cut when it's a family member, someone who's known you your whole life. It stains in the same spot the rest of your life when they say things. It's just the way it is, because they've always known you and they know how to talk to you, and you accept it the same way. So when you have that moment, they've said something, done something, and you're experiencing something, the best piece of advice that Alicia had said was to stay in it. Just appreciate what the feeling is. Not like it's a good thing, but it's just recognize what you're going through. And this is a whole real deep perspective of, self-awareness and consciousness. I know this goes a little bit deeper than you anticipate, but basically, yes, I'm experiencing something I didn't like. You can view yourself experiencing it, and it actually allows you to separate from the emotion. I didn't like what my sister just said. Why don't I like it? How do I have to react this way? I know my instinct is to want to eat those pierogies. I know she makes me angry. Am I always going to be angry? Like, why did she say it? Do I have to respond in this way? Just feeling the fire and all those emotions, all these things are going to be there. That's not even a question. You're going to feel bad about it, but how you react to feeling bad, that can be mastered as a skill. And I use the term skill very specifically because it might not work the first time, but it could work the second or third. And when I say work, it's even just allowing you to take a step back and be like, oh, wait, I'm feeling something that I normally feel, and I should ask myself what's going on here. It's paying attention, right? It's really paying attention within the moment that you're about to correct an error, or you're about to perform an error. And in order to correct the error, you have to be aware that it's happening right before it does. It's kind of a weird example, but as a goalie or as a competitor, even in boxing, what you need to do in order to perform a skill on another against another opponent is you have to see what their body is doing and cueing to you so that you can anticipate your next movement. I know that's kind of a different way to look at it, but that's what you're doing right now with yourself. Anticipate what the emotion is going to lead you to, and how can you cut it off before it happens, or how can you convert it into something? Because habits are, cue, routine, reward, right? So cue, they said something bad about you. Routine, let's eat something. Reward, I feel better for now. And repeat, right? So to get that cue, she said something bad, let's block that routine. Okay, why did she say it? Why do I feel this way? Is it going to stay this way? Do I have to stay feeling this way? It'll probably subside. Okay, maybe if I do want a pierogi still, what if I had half a pierogi? What if I just didn't have a pierogi for 5 minutes? Maybe it'll subside. And those little things, it's amazing how it can add up. Now, it's not the first time. It's not the second or third or fourth or fifth. Maybe it's the 20th. But my point is, and this is where I'll go into my own example. I've been battling my instinct to binge for so long, but I never really understood how to. I'd say probably almost 10 years, maybe a little less, probably close to 10 years. It never really got better. It got worse. And my binges would be just a ton of, routine was chocolate chips. And I go to 7-Eleven more specifically. Uh, Chocolate chips, M&Ms, peanut M&Ms. If they had a brownie, their bakery at 7-Eleven, I actually love. Like I love their cookies and their brownies. I think they got M&Ms in the brownie, or at least one other. I'd have three treats there, and then like a G2 Gatorade because you gotta skip the sugar. But my whole point is, I routinely would binge over years, and I don't know what really kind of started the thought process to start paying attention to things, but I was getting more into mindset. I was getting more into mindfulness, and I started to ask myself these questions. I started to really even just say, okay, why here? And then and this was my point of like developing skill of when you're about to do something you don't want to do. I started to appreciate when I was in the midst of a binge and it's already gone far. I didn't let myself say that it's too far. I would say, well, at least I stopped here. And that actually was where it started. I honestly remember the day where I finally said, well, I got to start somewheres. I know I keep failing at this. I know it keeps happening again and again and again, but at least I had a little bit less today. And even in that instinct, you're kind of pushing against something, right? I might have let the wall down for a bit. I might have consumed a lot of calories and I feel awkwardly full. But then there was this moment where I just said, no, let's just at least here. At least we push into it a little bit. So there's this modest resistance that I'm pushing against. It's basically like if we'll go back to a physical example, I don't work out at all. Say you say your scenario, you are a person that doesn't work out at all. And you say, well, at least I'm going to do one set. Yes, absolutely. That's literally how it starts. At least I'm going to go for a walk. Yes, it's some form of effort in the right direction. 0 is 0. 1 is 1, and I know that's so blatantly obvious, but I think the effort has to be looked at and drawn out more. I think even if it's not a great effort, an effort is an effort. And then it's the consistent effort, because then, okay, I resisted the next time a little bit and it was around the same, still over 8, but I'm getting used to that feeling of pulling back. Now, completely honest here is that a lot of my binges and my poor relationship with food has always been attributed to me smoking weed, getting the munchies. And it's not just the weed. It's not just that. It's me being empowered by the fact that I was baked. And it's like heightened. It's a heightened version of it, but I've certainly binged to a disgusting level being sober as well. But most of the time, that's what it was. The reason why I address this is because there's this resistance I had to push against, and it was even harder when I was baked. And so I had to start to recognize what is that feeling of discomfort, and I had to lean into it. And so I'm going to bring this right back to the holiday dinners. Don't worry, side tangent, but it applies to what we were talking about. You're going to feel a personal resistance to the idea of a feeling of resistance in your stomach and your whole being of wanting to reach for one more, wanting to have a little bit more, another drink, another chocolate chip cookie, whatever it is. You're going to want to have more than enough. But this is where you say, okay, well, I know I've had enough as far as energy intake has. I'm certain of that. I know I'm actually full. You can always do a water test, drink a good cup of water, make sure you feel like your stomach has enough in it. And then the last thing I say is, if I'm truly not done, why don't I have a protein shake later, or maybe even a treat? Maybe even that's what it takes to get you out of that. But generally speaking, if you give it about 20 minutes, cravings will subside. And I know that's a long time, but this gives you a time to be with your family, even if they aggravate you, and try to talk about something else. Try to be in the midst of the conversation. The other thing I was going to say is don't look at the food. If you keep looking at it, you're going to keep thinking about it. So fight that instinct. I recognized that years ago, that the more you look at food, more of a problem it ends up being. So being aware of certain foods, being aware of certain people that can trigger, and being aware of your emotions around all of this. I know that was a big tangent on emotion, but I think, and binging in general, but I think it all applies to this scenario for some of us for sure. And then from there, you get the whole dinner. We know it's probably going to be, if you get away with the maintenance after the holidays, you're crushing it. I think that's amazing. If you somehow nail your deficit goals, you're extremely motivated. The probability of us being in a calorie surplus is quite high, which isn't a problem. I want to point this out. That's not a negative. Let's say for me, my calorie balance is somewhere around 2,700. Okay, 2,700 calories. Let's say I had 3,000 calories. I know I ate too much. That's not a fucking big deal. Let's say I had 3,500. Still not a fucking big deal, because it's 3,600 calories for a pound of fat. One day of even 500 or 1,000 calories too much is not a big problem. The next day is the issue. But even before we talk about the next day, we talk about the yo-yo and all that stuff. There's also a partial benefit that can happen over the holidays. We are in probably a high calorie zone where we're probably going to be closer to either a maintenance or a surplus and a deficit for some of us. And I think that's something to accept. I think that's okay, especially when we're looking at New Year's and how many of us are going to want to be like, new year, new me. And hey, I'm a part of it. I got a transition coming up, a transformation challenge coming up. And if you want more details about that, also hit me up. But all my clients and me, we're all going to be doing a transformation challenge in the new year. And so what I encourage for the benefit of the maintenance to a surplus, especially if it's like a modest one, meaning like, let's say it was only 10 to 20% more than your normal calories. And that's kind of where you're at consistently for a few weeks. That's an ideal zone to gain muscle. That is an ideal zone to gain muscle. That's 10 to 20% is actually what I recommend. Going way beyond that, doing the dirty bulk style, that's where you're going to put on body fat. So we are in a zone, or we could be near a zone where we can gain muscle. So this is actually the other step that I was always training. Like, I've been an exercise addict since my early 20s. This is nothing new, but recognizing like what a great time to take advantage of it. And I think for the most part, there was a bit of a mistake where I would do cardio and I would do some, weight training, and I would get in good shape, and I would kind of let off the gas pedal. If anything, I should push down the gas pedal. So what I actually did was, a week or so ago, I think it was last week or the week before, I think it was last week, I just did a deload week because I want to go hard over the holidays. I enjoy the holidays. So I enjoy training. So that's kind of my thing. And if you enjoy training, this is a great time to do it. This is such a great time to do it. So if you normally do 3 sets, do 4 sets. If you normally do 3 total bodies, once you go lower, upper, lower, upper, lower, upper, and you spread out that frequency, I'd say you're really busy. You don't even have time to do your normal training. This is where I love the body weight squat challenge, or just the body weight challenge. I had many clients do it, and I did it as well, where I was just caught up at work all day, and then I was going to Christmas Eve dinner with a family, and it was going to be high calorie. And I was like, well, I know that if I get my legs burning from doing as many body weight squats as I can, I'm going to gain something, right? There's got to be some muscle growth. So that's exactly what I did. And sure enough, 500 body weight squats, you will be shocked as to how simple, hard, and effective that is. Just 100 body weight squats. You do it over the course of a day. Let's say you're cleaning or preparing your house. You just do 50 to 60 squats at a time until it burns. You need that muscle burning. You need to go to that point where you're like, oh, I can't do another. And then you're going to feel great about the food because you're like, hey, this protein is going to work. This energy is going to building me. This is not a compensation model. This is a benefit model. Let me explain what I mean by that. I'm not trying to tell you to do 500 body weight squats so you can have an extra 5,000 calories. I'm trying to tell you that the probability of you having a high calorie or too many calories is high. We're still aiming to have the right amount, and we're still likely going to overconsume calories, and that's all good. And it benefits us if we do more training that day and the day after. That's my point. My point is that this can yield a net positive. Again, come back to this whole idea of, if I get the experience of what I want, I'm in the appropriate energy range, and my training actually yields to have maybe a little bit more muscle growth. Now, substantial muscle growth takes a long time. I'm not going to act like you've done an official bulk by any means. But I'm just saying, even if it's on a micro level, you're possibly doing a little bit more lean muscle tissue growth, right? So usually you want 3 to 4 months to do that. But even if it's this micro point, it's still at least doing a little bit more than nothing, right? It's better than you just waiting until the new year to do your training, to try to flip your life around. If anything, this should amplify it, right? So encourage the training, and that could be over the course of the week leading up to it, the week after it, and then you kind of get into and then you're hitting the ground running in the new year. Like, I think it's so important to stay active throughout the holidays in some way. So then after Christmas is a really important time, right? Because we're in this what the fuck do we do zone, or why the fuck not zone. That's what I call it, right? So there's a very challenging time is Boxing Day and the day after and day after that. So what I actually encourage is that, first off, don't go into a deficit again. Don't abstain and say, I'm not eating the next day. You also shouldn't, in my opinion, dive right back into the leftovers. I recommend at least one day, possibly even 2, abstaining from those sweets. Now, the reason for this is quite simple. You start to crave, and you're skewing your expectation for food and craving that much more frequent you have it. So if you have a cookie each day, then you're going to start craving that cookie. And again, digestibility, all these other things. Give yourself a day, maybe 2, of having whole foods again. Just get back to eating good digesting foods and eat to a maintenance. Now, this, again, is a little bit of a, what? Should I make up for what I did? No, this is where the yo-yo, or what I prefer to call the pendulum, slows the fuck down. Let's imagine a scenario that's poor, like a bad one. And you say, okay, Rhyland, I couldn't do it. I got really pissed off at my siblings, and I ate a lot, like, at least 1,000 calories or so. Okay, so what? Like, just have that notion. Okay, so what? Like, for you to have 3,600 calories is quite substantial, but even then, okay, so what? So, like, even then, what you do is you don't allow the excessive instinct to take over, because what you could end up doing is, okay, I'm just not going to eat that day. And then the food's still around, or someone offers you something, and then you binge again. So preventing the yo-yo is to prevent the emotional swinging, right? The excessive overindulgence to the excessive restriction. And so that goes both ways. If you overly restrict, you'll want to binge. If you overly binge, you'll want to restrict. And no matter what, be the person that's stopping that pendulum from moving. Okay. So when you feel that motion and it's the Sunday, I guess, because Christmas will land on the Sunday, it's Boxing Day, and you're like, oh, yesterday was a bad day of eating. You tell yourself, okay, well, I can eat as much as I think I need to of whole foods. So just eating nice, clean whole foods and feeling full. Now, what this does is, I'm not even telling you to measure and weigh all that stuff. I'm going to talk about that on another one, but, and I wouldn't even recommend, I would just calm it down. Just try to make some normalcy happen in your life and see what happens, and just see that, oh, hey, I don't have to panic when things aren't perfect. And then before you know it, at the end of the day, you feel a lot more normal. And then the next day, on Monday, maybe you think, okay, let's get a little closer to the deficit again. If you want, you could take a couple of days like that. And then by then, it's been a day without any sweets or sugar or, highly palatable foods. You might even think like, I don't even really want those leftovers. And that's fine. Or maybe you do. Maybe you want a treat. And I would encourage treat at the end of the day. But what I really encourage is that one day of whole foods at a maintenance, so that you control your instincts around it. That's what I learned. I learned last year that it's like one of the biggest lessons for me evolving into a diet that, that I knew had to end up being more restrictive, was not really feeling restrictive at the start, but being very appropriate with the food types, right? And I don't think being excessively restrictive with only whole food is the only way to eat, but starting with a lot of it actually helps you pull away from some of the other stuff. So I just remember that day where I was just thinking about getting into it. I'm like, what if I just eat all whole foods as much as I want and I don't weigh it, I don't track, I don't do anything? And it worked because it's hard to eat a lot of whole foods. And then I eased my way back into my calorie deficit, and it felt effortless. So that's a big one there, to evolve yourself into it. And then again, now we're getting it in a step ahead of the new year. So we're in the why the fuck not zone, right? But the reason not to is quite simple, is that you got to do something different. If you've repeatedly, really think about this, if you've repeatedly always ended up waiting till the new year to make change, and you repeatedly, unsuccessfully ended up trying to lose the weight and keep it off that you wanted, and you repeatedly end up in this spot similar during the holidays, do one thing different. Do one thing different and start a few days ahead. Why do we have to wait to the new year? It's literally a Monday after Christmas, so there's no reason you can't start on a Monday, right? At least you're starting on a Monday. But my whole point there is there is some notion of, maybe you even say, I'm ahead of everyone else by 5 days or 6, 7 days. But get ahead of yourself for sure. Get ahead of your own instincts. As I had mentioned, what's evolved, because it hasn't shifted and not black and white different, but what's evolved in my character is little improvements over time. What's evolved is that I recognize when I'm about to do something that I used to do and I want to do different. You got to pick up on your own cues if you want to evolve your habits and your own behavior over time. So in that year or in that week, to get ahead of that new year. And there's one more idea. Just think of one thing. It could be the whole foods approach. It could be, maybe I'm just going to train again, just one set a day, anything to get you going. But what I really actually, I like this mindset. And I thought about this, I think this last year. It makes you center yourself a bit more humbly. Now, we live by a calendar. We live by cycles. Like I get caught up in a Monday, Saturday, Sunday cycle, just like anyone else. Even if I have stuff to do, I say, it's Sunday or it's Saturday. But what if there was no days of the week, right? We invented the calendar. Like that's all what that is, right? We assume that the sun's not going to blow up at some point in time. And I'm just saying that our whole concept of time is really a social construct. And the reason I'm pointing this out is, like, if there was no calendar, you didn't know how long you were going to live, you would live a little bit different, right? Get rid of that calendar mindset just for 1 week. There's no Jan 1st, right? There's an opportunity for you to move forward. And that's the way I look at it. I want to be just very present as soon as I can. Even for myself, like I say, I know I'm going into this transformation challenge in a couple of weeks here, and my diet's pretty whole foods. I like my diet, but it doesn't mean I'm not already practicing towards what I'm going to be doing for my transformation. It doesn't mean I'm not already aware that I have to start to slow down some of these other habits, like honestly smoking weed and drinking. I have to start to evolve into it rather than, okay, let's go cold turkey and then hope this lasts all fucking year, because that doesn't work, right? And that's about it. Honestly, I think getting a step ahead is how I can summarize the end of this, because it's within your power, but make sure you have a good reason why, and then go from there. And I think that might be a great future podcast to have Laura Cicerelli on again and talk about. You make sure your motivation's there, and then start taking some action steps in the new year. But that's it for today. I think I did a pretty good tangent on how I've evolved my habits over the holidays and binging and all the other mindsets around food, because I'm still working on it. Full disclosure, if you haven't caught on, like, I'm still working on this, and it's honestly never been better, because I'm working on it, because I never knew how to work on it. I didn't know how to lean into these things and to pay attention to different things and to look at the calories, to look at my activities. All these things actually added up to helping me so much more. And so I hope that helped you. I hope there's some really solid nuggets of information for you. And if you ever need help, you want some guidance, don't hesitate to reach out. And I will have a more in-depth version of this. We'll go more in depth for the how to enjoy healthy holidays presentation. And I go more in depth on the calories. I go more in depth on all the different stresses that go around it and planning and organizing. And very similar discussion, but I go into giving you more actionable steps. So I hope this helped. If you do want that package, don't hesitate to reach out. You can reach me at RQ Training Nutrition on Instagram, or you can straight up email me, rylandquali@gmail.com. I'm here to help people. That's what I do. That's how I try to serve this world. So I hope this helped you. And other than that, no matter what, I truly, truly hope you and your family have a wonderful, peaceful, safe, happy holiday. And I will see you in the new year.